Yeah, I want you to digest that title for a bit there. Just, yeah, it's such a great name. It's the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Fighting Edition for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Because it has fighting in it. Really. I guess the past Power Ranger games that were released before this one were the hand-holding Let's Drink Strange Fruit Shakes at the Angel Grove Youth Center Gym and Juice Bar editions, right? Yeah. In any case, MMPR The Fighting Edition is the third of 4 Power Ranger video game offerings from Natsume Bandai to grace the Super NES. And unlike the previous 2 games, which were mainly side-scrolling action platformers, this one's your run-of-the-mill one-on-one fighting game similar in vein to Power Rangers on the Sega Genesis, the first game, which was also a fighting game. Except this one's actually kinda sorta fun to play. So if you've played the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie game for Super NES, you'll know the game lacked any significant involvement from the Rangers' Megazords, the giant robot things. Well, there's a good reason for that. They saved all the Zords for this game, the Power Rangers Fighting Edition, and so we're greeted with 8 playable fighters. The Thunder Megazord, the Mega Tiger Zord, the Ninja Megazord, the Shogun Megazord, the Lip Syncer monster from Season 2, the Silverhorns monster from Season 2, Goldar, and Lord Zed himself. So we're evenly matched in that department. Oh, by the way, in proper continuity, by the time the Power Rangers got their hands on the Ninja Zords and Shogun Zords, the Thunder and Tiger Zords were destroyed by Rita Repulsa's brother Rito Revolto, who's not in this game, but me, who cares about continuity, right? Yeah, why don't you have a seat over there? And stay there. Anyways. Moving right along, here's a quick rundown of the modes in this game. You have Story Mode, where you can either play as the Thunder Megazord or Mega Tiger Zord and must blow through all the other monsters and Megazords for some reason, on your way to meet up against the final boss, Ivan Ooze, who looks much better in this game than he did in the previous game. Just saying. Story Mode only has a couple cutscenes comprising the fall of a couple enemy monsters, and that's about it. If there was any story to be told here, it's probably in some instruction manual that I have no access to, but then again, this is old school Mighty Morphin Power Rangers where storytelling was often secondary to just tossing up a monster for costume heroes and their giant robots to defeat every other day, so whatever. Now you have the Versus mode, which is your stock 2-player mode where you can play as all 8 playable fighters in the game. The fighters comprise the Power Rangers' 4 Megazords, 2 Monsters of the Day, Perennial Whipping Ape Goldar, and Evil Fleshman Lord Zed. You could also play as Ivan Ooze in this mode with a special code and use his powers of the cheapness to overcome all odds, or something. And finally, you have the Trial mode, which is essentially the survival mode of Fighting Edition. Pick a fighter, fight all comers with only incremental health boosters per victory, nothing out of the ordinary. In terms of the fighting, it's your typical Street Fighter 2 clone where each fighter has a set of special moves that can be pulled off with the usual commands, well, sort of. You see, the main gimmick of this Fighting Edition is the power meter that is constantly charging and emptying on a regular basis. Now when you pull off a special move at the exact moment your power meter is full, you'll get a slight upgrade in power that will enhance your special attacks. Doing this several more times will cause your power meter to change colors and eventually crackle lightning, at which point you have access to a much more powerful Mighty Morphin special move, or whatever the proper terminology the game uses for such a move. You know what, let's just call it a super move and be done with it. It's pretty much the same thing. Moving right along. Actually, to tell you the truth, there isn't a whole lot to Fighting Edition of Power Rangers. Sure, control's fairly tight, and it's easy to pull off the various special moves, with the timing of syncing your commands with a full power meter being the only tricky part, but that's still doable without too much effort. And there's a decent range of balance among the fighters, with some being quicker, some being stronger, and some being cheap as hell. It's a fairly competent fighter, and it's merely content in being a fairly competent fighter. Which, much like the first Power Rangers game on the Sega Genesis, which was also a fighting game, this one is fairly limited. 8 fighters, 9 if you count Ivan Ooze, is not much, even for a fighting game made in 1995. At the time you had games such as Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo with 16 playable characters to choose from, or the various SNK fighters such as King of Fighters, which had around 20 plus fighters. Even the Mighty Morphin games on the Sega Game Gear had more fighters than this. There's not much in terms of variety, and once you've mastered all the fighters, there's not much left to do. Of course, mastering the fighters is done in a rather uneven process, since the main mode, Story Mode, only gives you 2 of the 8 fighters to play with, and both get the same generic ending that only changes depending on the difficulty played. So if you want to play as one of the other 6 fighters such as Lord Zed or the Shogun Megazord, you'll either have to rope a friend in to play the game's versus mode, or you'll have to make do with the trial mode, which is more of a quicker run around the block than anything worth noting. In terms of graphics, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Fighting Edition actually looks pretty damn good for the most part. Dare I say that out of all the SNES iterations of Power Rangers, this might be the best looking one by far, which doesn't say a whole lot to be honest with you because they all look fairly decent, but Fighting Edition looks great for the most part. The 9 fighters featured in the game not only resemble their live action counterparts, but they're rather sizable fighters. They don't feel or look smaller than they should, they're giant killing machines and they look the part. Not to mention that there's quite a bit of detail to these characters actually. Mind you, the fighters seem somewhat smaller than the Megazord and the giant monsters in the original SNES Power Rangers game, at least it seems like that to me, but they're still pretty big, they look damn good, and they're a far better sight than the Genesis MMPR game. The first one, not the movie one. Aside from that, the battle arenas are fairly colorful and visually decent if not barren. There's only a few arenas in the game, a theater, airport, mountainside, the moon, and the techno-looking command center arena that's home to all 4 Megazords. That's actually a bit of a cop-out actually. The few cutscenes in the game, story mode, looks decent, the mugshots are decent looking, and the seizure-inducing lightning on the options and intermission screens are annoying, but other than that, Fighting Edition looks pretty damn good. Music-wise, Fighting Edition falters. Look, I'm not one of those folks who cry and moan about the lack of familiar music tracks from the show as composed by Ron Wasserman. In actuality, I actually prefer the original tracks made for the video games over the show tunes. The Super NES version of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie had little to do with the movie itself, but it still had a pretty kick-ass soundtrack for the most part. However, the music in Fighting Edition is just plain generic sounding at best and mediocre at worst. Just about the only tune of note in this game is the extended Go-Go Power Rangers theme that plays during the Command Center stage. I'm sure anyone who's skilled in audio editing can take this and the title screen together and put it together to loop a longer remixed piece to play on a CD or something, but the rest of the tunes in this game are rather forgettable. Sound effects are nothing special, some of the sounds seem to be ripped from the movie game, which isn't surprising, developers tend to recycle sound all the time. Really, there's not much to say in that regard, they're just there, with a bit of an echo at times. Sounds like they carry a bit of impact, I guess, I don't know. It's fine for the most part, I guess. Overall, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers The Fighting Edition is something of a bare-bones release even by the fighting game standards of the time. For what it's worth, it's a fairly competent fighting game that plays well enough, and its power meter feature does make the gameplay interesting and keeps it from being another cookie-cutter fighting game on the SNES. However, the story mode is pretty pointless for the most part, and the game's limited roster does little to add to the game's overall replay value. Fighting Edition is a game that you might get more enjoyment out of if you had a buddy to play it with, but even then you'll probably be able to squeeze a few fights out of this one before you decide to pop in that copy of Mortal Kombat 1 on your Super Nintendo. Look at all that sweat. Now that's quality entertainment right there, folks. Nonetheless, if you're into old school Power Rangers and find this laying around for a couple bucks, then it might be fun for a few quick rounds. But otherwise, this probably won't hold your interest for too long, and you'll eventually migrate back to the other better fighters available on the console. Pretty decent fare, but not a whole lot of meat.